Welcome to the Northland Bassin Podcast with fishing guide John Myhre and bass tournament angler Ken Milender. On the Northland Bassin Podcast, we cover everything bass fishing for both largemouth and smallmouth here in the Wisconsin Northland and all across the northern tier of Midwest states. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Northland Bassin Podcast. I'm John Myhre. I'm sitting here with, I got co-host Ken Milender in here, and we've got Noah Glitto in here, a fishing guide. And Noah, good to have you on the show here.
It's good to be on the show, talk about some fishing, get people interested in coming to the area and catching some bass. A lot of times people are looking for walleyes on opener, but catching bass is catch and release all year round in Wisconsin. It's something fun to do.
You know, it's an opportunity. I mean, right now we're sitting out here in my shop looking at the boat and a bunch of stuff, but ice is going out as we're recording this, and there's places you could get a boat in right now and go bass fishing, right, Ken?
Yeah, a lot of the smaller lakes are wide open.
Yeah, Lake Hayward, I mean, there's some good bass fishing in Lake Hayward. That's open, and I know the rivers are all open right now. Some of them are running a little bit high, but, there's... we'll talk about that, the river, a little bit later, too, as we get into it here. But there's, the bass fishing up north, in northern Minnesota, northern Wisconsin, northern UP, even into the Dakotas, especially smallmouth, is world-class fishery. And for the most part, it gets overlooked by a lot of people. It's they got walleyes. That's what they want to go after a lot of the times, or panfish, it seems like.
Yeah, the big focus seems to be on those fish that you'd bring home to cook up and to do a fish fry. Your walleyes, your sunfish, your crappies, pike are something that a lot of people are starting to get into keeping pike now. But the bass has just been a fish that historically people just haven't really kept them to eat them.
No, they haven't. And that has an impact. I mean, today we're looking at more people, since the COVID especially, we've got more people on the water now than we've had, and they've got better equipment, better knowledge, better mapping, better everything. And I think there's more pressure on the fisheries sometimes, in particular some lakes, but there are lakes that don't get it too.
Yeah, so in regards to catch and release, there's some lakes, bass will become the dominant predator on sunfish, and if the overpopulation of sunfish, it becomes stunted, so some lakes the DNR will allow to take extra sunfish just to keep the yearly classes in check. But then some lakes, the largemouth will have too many, and there's no food for them between that 3 and 6 pound range, so there's disruptions in the ecosystem. So as far as selective harvest on all species, it matters on every lake.
Well, there's so many different regulations. If you go across the whole Northland here, there's a ton of different regulations on different lakes. Even right here in the Hayward area, we've got all kinds of different regulations on largemouth and smallmouth, especially the largemouth.
Yeah, we've got a lot of special regulations on minimum size, bag limits. A lot of smallmouth lakes around here, you might only be able to keep one over 18 inches if you do decide to keep one at all. And a lot of our lakes have special regulations. You have to check and make sure that you can keep them, because you might go to a lake and it might say 10 panfish limit, but only 5 of them can be crappies. And that's becoming more common. They're starting to make more amendments on some of these special regulations to make sure we're not over-harvesting the crappies in lakes or over-harvesting the sunfish in some of these lakes.
We're going to see a lot more of that, I think, in the future. Especially with panfish, you're going to see a lot of 5 bag limits because, like I said, the equipment we've got, the technology, and everything else, it's just too easy to put an exorbitant amount of pressure on these fish, it seems like.
Yeah, the anglers have to, analyze what they're doing day in and day out on a lake, and they have to be a little selective, themselves to protect the fishery, down the road. As an example, Sand Lake used to have a lot of 15 to 17.5 inch crappies in it, and there was a couple cabins when they'd go spawn in them reeds out there in the middle. They just go way over their limit, and then the game wardens they don't have enough funding to react to all the complaints put forward, and then so it's like I always thought the DNR should have an app where a person could take video or photos and pictures and submit it on the app, and that way the DNR and other people have access to it, to keep the fish respectable as far as what the law allows you to keep.
Well, that's getting to be a big thing now because the DNR doesn't have as much funding out there as what they tell us. And, the number of wardens out there, there's not as many wardens. There's not as much stocking going on. And that comes down to where I've been saying this for a long time. It's getting to where each individual angler needs to do their part. How many fish do you really need to keep? The fish you're releasing, you want to be real careful with the fish and release them carefully. It could go on and on and on, but there's a lot of things the angler can do themselves to ensure that we're going to see a good fishery.
Being an ethical angler in today's world of fishing is going to be very vital for the future of our resource here. Like you say, the wardens here, our DNR is a little bit underfunded on some of that. There's not many wardens around. One time, a couple years back, I ran into a warden at a boat landing that I've never seen him before. I said, "Hey, how often do you ever make it out here?" He had his boat in the water, and he says maybe only a couple times a year. And I said, "Well, what are you out here doing today? Are you doing, surveys and stuff and checking registrations?" He goes, "No, I'm here to inspect a deck someone's building on their home. The homeowner next to him, their neighbor called complaining." Now we're just, we're spreading the resource even thinner by stuff like that. He says it has nothing to do with him, but because they called and filed a report, he's got to go out there and waste his time on it. So instead of him going out and catching the guys that are keeping over their limit or fishing without licenses or, getting access illegally, he's wasting his time doing something he doesn't need to be doing.
In more strict regulations has an impact too. Heck, one of the other guides from the area here was coming back from over by Park Falls, and he stopped at a place to have a beer, and he was telling me he was talking to a couple of locals there, and they were complaining, and they said, we used to go down to this lake down here, and we used to catch crappies by the bucketful. We cleaned up on the crappies and some big crappies, but they went to that 5-bag limit, and only one could be over 12 inches. We won't even go back to that lake. So, that'll keep some people off of the regulations. Not everybody, but for the most part, I think a lot of anglers are starting to get more conscientious when it comes to conservation issues, I think. Don't you know?
Yeah, it sounds like, a lot of the younger anglers are pretty savvy. They can go and find on the website and search specifically for the county that they're in, find the lake they're in, find the special regulations. At all the public boat landings, there's going to be a sign there posted with what it says. But, the anglers are learning a little bit and paying attention to that stuff. But you also got to remember, and this as a guide, John, that people will get in your boat and they have no clue, no idea. They have no idea that you can only keep, 10 fish on the Chippewa flowage now, that it's not 25. And they might think that it was still 50 from back when it might have been 50. Yeah. There's a lot of people out there that really have no idea. And if they were to go fishing on their own and get on a real good bite, they might be keeping all them fish and have no idea that they are even breaking the rules. But that's your job as the angler, as the outdoorsman, to know the rules, follow the rules, and be ethical.
Seen a lot in all the years I've been guiding. My guide license number isn't number 1, but it's not very far up the chain, I think. Been doing it a long time. Ken, I know we're starting to run out of time to get to the opener right now. So if people haven't gotten their boats ready and started thinking about stuff, it's time to start really getting in gear, make sure everything's ready to go and everything, isn't it?
Yeah. One thing I should mention, the DNR, they want to introduce fishing to younger generations, because license sales are down for that. So they decided to open up catch and release for bass and smallmouth. Up until, I think, it's open year round for catch and release. But I think the DNR should have stipulated that no live bait be used, because I've noticed, the first year when we had early ice out, I've seen a lot of mortality of fish on the lakes, and being reported by different guides where the fish were dying because they were gill hooked and stuff.
I should say that too, is that if you're going to fish live bait for bass, fish it on a jig head. Do not fish it on a single hook, because if you're fishing it on a single hook, they are going to have it way down in their gullet, and it's going to be higher mortality rate. Jigs generally hook farther out, closer to the end of the mouth, where you can get the hook out fairly easy.
And then this year, it's going to be for muskies, so that could be really detrimental to the food chain of these guys are going out there with. Let's face it, probably muskie suckers.
Actually, it's going to be catchy and be able to harvest them.
It's going to be a harvest season.
Oh, you can harvest them,
Yeah, it's going to be a harvest season opener on May 2nd, and now most musky anglers are a catch and release angler, but they still list it as the harvest season.
But there still is mortality with live bait.
Oh yeah, anytime you catch a fish and release it, there's a chance of mortality. That's why I say you need to be real careful on how you handle the fish and don't keep it out of the water too long. And you could go on, but there's a lot of things you can do to ensure that fish you release is going to survive to be caught again. Well, I talked about a bunch of different stuff, but right now we're going to talk a little bit about the Hayward area here, as they are one of the big sponsors of this podcast. And, Hayward is a very unique area. There's a couple of areas in northern Wisconsin, for instance, that are very unique areas as far as tourism. And this one is a little less commercialized than the one farther east of us. But we've got everything here. You've got, hundreds of miles of ATV trails and snowmobile trails. You've got hiking trails, and you could go on and on and on. You got lots of water. I don't know how many lakes in the area. I forgot how many, but there's hundreds of lakes basically, and all different sizes. A lot of small remote lakes you can walk back into. You got the Nesquamigan National Forest area. There's so much things to go see and do. And I know you get into a bunch of that stuff too, but there's lots to do, right?
There's lots to do around here, and the diversity that we have here between the super clear water lakes listed as some of the clearest lakes in our state, the smallmouth fisheries we have, the flowage systems we have, the dark water, shallow fisheries that are easy to just go catch a bunch of fish on. We've got the Chippewa flowage, which is, where the record muskie was caught, and all these other lakes, small lakes, remote lakes, national forests. You got the trails and the snowmobile trails. We got restaurants galore. We got barred restaurants everywhere. I mean, Hayward is the place to come to just have a good time, a good weekend, maybe stay for the week, rent a cabin, go rent a side-by-side from Power Sports and go ripping down the trails, go hire John Myhre to bring you out and catch monster smallmouth bass in some remote lake that you never even heard of before.
Well, yeah, but there's a lot of things. You mentioned the Chippewa flowage, and that's a very unique lake for people that don't know about it. It's classified as a wilderness lake, so there's only a few areas that are developed. It's 90-some% wilderness, and islands everywhere, and you got 11 different lakes dammed up. It's an excellent fishery for just about every species of fish. But the interesting thing, you've got clear water to dark water in the lake, and it's a complex lake. I mean, it's got more miles of shoreline.
200 miles of shoreline.
It's more miles of shoreline in 15 or 16,000 acre lake than Leech Lake in Minnesota has at over 100,000 acres. So that tells you it's complex. You got all these back bays, and if you want to get back away from someplace and secluded fishing where there's nobody there, that's one of the lakes you can do it on. But we got a bunch of them here.
Yeah, one of my personal favorites to fish on. Taking clients out, weaving between the islands. No big cabins, no lush green grass lawns. We got woods. We got wildlife. We got everything that you're looking for in a Northwoods outdoor experience. Go catch some fish.
Well, anybody's looking for more information on Hayward Lakes area in Hayward, you can go to my website, WILCNorthlandOutdoors.com. I also have another website that's WNOradio.com. But also the Hayward Lakes Visitor and Convention Bureau website, that's haywardlakes.com. And the Hayward Chamber of Commerce. Their website is haywardareachamber.com. So those are places you can go, and you can get free visitor guides sent to you from them with a lot of information on things to do and see and lodging and everything else.
Not to mention all the lakes and stuff, but this, in my opinion, is a kayaker's paradise.
Oh, yeah.
You have the Flambeau River, the East and West Fork. They got big muskies, big smallies, largemouth on some of them. You got the Teal River, it's got largemouth. And not to mention the small lakes that have these little canoe accesses out in the Nesquamigan National Forest. I mean,
you got a lot of smaller rivers, too. I mean, feeder rivers that feed into, the Coudray River. You got up the headwaters of the West Fork of Chippewa. You got the Torch River. A lot of them you can kayak or canoe down, and there's fish in all of them. So a lot of different places to go.
And some of those little lakes got trout in them.
Yeah, there are some lakes in backwoods here that are stock trout lakes. You know what? Let's talk a little bit about early spring fishing, and let's break it down a little bit. Let's start with the smallmouth bass. That's interest with a lot of people. We get people from all over the country that come up here to the Northland, whether it's northern Minnesota or Wisconsin or Michigan, or they're coming up here to fish smallmouth bass because pound for pound, there's not a more fun fish to fish for, is there, Noah?
They fight till the last second they got. I mean, they will be flopping around the net, flopping around the boat. You're trying to get the hook out of them. They're flopping around. You're trying to get a picture of them. They're flopping around. And you fought the sucker for 2-3 minutes, while he's swimming laps around the boat, and you guys chasing him around with the net. You can't get him in. He's pulling too hard, pulling drag. And it's just, they are hard fighting fish.
In trophy class fish in that 20-inch or better range are fairly common on some waters up here.
Yeah, right now water temp's probably 35, maybe 40 on the smaller lakes up on the flats. Smallmouths are a little bit harder to catch when the water's in the low 40s, but they still can catch them. Largemouth, just 4 degrees water temp makes a big difference. So right after ice out, they'll go really shallow, try to find the biggest flat or the back of a bay, and they'll be up there. And if it's clear water, you'll see them.
Look for the warmest water, no matter what you're fishing for. 1 degree can make a difference in this activity of these fish. And, when you're talking fishing in the 40-degree range, fish slow. I mean, one of my friends said, he didn't realize until he was doing it that smallmouth fishing can be kind of boring sometimes because you're fishing so slow and methodically. I mean, you literally, for instance, a Ned rig, you got to put it, drag it on the bottom, stop it, leave it sit there for 10, 15, 20 seconds and move it again. I don't know. Noah, you got any great tips for the early season on the smallmouth?
Early season for smallmouth in that cold water, right come ice out. A lot of those fish, you can get a good reaction of them if they're in a school on a reaction style bait, a jerk bait, a blade bait, something flashy, quick, snap. You might catch a couple doing that right away, but the school gets wise fast. And then you really got to slow down. Fishing, like you said, a Ned rig, or maybe you fish a hair jig or a drop shot, something small, something finesse, and really slow. Those fish in this clear water we have here, they can see your lure from a long ways away, and they can hear it touching the rocks, touching the sand, tick, 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 and they know it's there. You leave it there long enough, they're coming back to check it out.
Well, you mentioned hair jigs, and that's almost a forgotten lure that seems to be coming back some now. And it's absolutely deadly for catching not just bass, but walleyes and everything else. But, Ken, let me ask you a question. Temperature-wise, when do you shift from things like a Ned rig or a hair jig and really slow finesse baits to more of an aggressive point like jerk baits, for instance? The jerk baits come on really heavy at a certain time there.
I start at 55 and go to 62. Jerk bait, sometimes you got to let it pause longer than sometimes. It seems like if they're on the edge of a drop, say 20 feet to 5, you have to dead stick it on the edge of that break. If they're up on top, you can be pretty aggressive.
Them breaks, when you're saying dead stick it, or that hesitation between your twitches, that can be several seconds sometimes.
Yeah. I first got onto it quite a few years ago when I got a backlash, throwing it up against the wind, and then I had gotten it down a couple of times, realized I had a backlash, couldn't reel no more, so I'm sitting down, and all of a sudden I got one,
Well, one guy was telling me one time he was working a jerk bait and he had to stop and take a swig of his coffee. He set the pole down and almost lost the pole. After about 10 seconds or 15 seconds, a fish grabbed it.
Yeah, so, leaving your lure in the strike zone is, the longer it's in the strike zone, the better chance you have of
the strike zone can be pretty narrow sometimes, too. Very close. You got to be within less than 6 inches of the fish sometimes.
So I don't know if it's water temp, pH of the water, cloud cover, barometric pressure, all those variations can position a fish on structure, but when them smallies tend to go, they go.
Oh, yeah.
And it can be really fun. And when you get those days where it's partially cloudy and you have a southwest wind, you can start with topwater, because sometimes that topwater will go all day long at 58, 60 degrees.
Well, the one thing I always tell people, too, is you start out with things like a topwater bait, and you're looking for those active fish. Heck, I've seen them come up from 20 feet of water to hit a topwater bait, a smallmouth.
Yeah.
But then other times, if you're not catching them, you want to slow down, because obviously that strike window or strike zone narrowed down. And there are times when, and especially early in the year when it's cold like this, there's times where I think that strike zone is maybe 6 inches in front of them. If it's not within 6 inches, you ain't going to catch them sometimes.
And it seems like, so two favorite fruits of smallies is crawdads. Then I'd go with insects and then minnows. Because it kind of transitions spring crawdads. And then there'll be a crawdad hatch. So, but between there's a big insect hatch in like June. And there's like little black, I just call them rock bugs. And they're about, I don't know, 1/4 inch. And I've actually watched them suck them up off the rocks. So that's when the marabou 1/8 ounce jig really pays off, and it's a no-brainer. You can just throw it up on these flats and just slowly roll it. On the lakes that have a lot of perch fry from the year before, they're going to be 3.5, 4 inches, sometimes larger, and then you can just slow roll a small swim bait up on top to cover a lot of water till you find them, because they are cruising. So smallies, the first thing on a lake, you have to decipher if they're on the bottom, they're feeding off the bottom, or if they're feeding on suspended stuff like crappies. They'll sit in the middle of the water column. When you have that very first insect hatch, they're just going to be sitting up there where they have the right amount of sunlight where they can see a lot further, so they don't have to rely on their lateral line and other such things. They're more sight feeding to eat the insects. Smallies are kind of the same thing. A lot of people think that smallies are a deep water fish. Not so. Yeah. Some of the biggest smallies have been caught in 2 feet of water that I've caught in the middle of summer. So it's really, smallies are more challenging than largemouth because largemouth are primarily weed oriented. Smallies can be caught pitching weeds and as far as right out with the walleyes and 22 feet on the end of a rock bar.
They're very versatile fish. I mean, they can be anywhere in that water, wherever everything they want, the food, the comfort, everything else, they'll be there. Do you guys notice any kind of progression that we could talk about for people from going from after ice out cold water in your more finesse, close to the bottom type presentations, moving to jerk baits, then you get to the spawn, and I know after spawn, the jerk baits don't seem to be as effective sometimes.
That can definitely be the case after the spawn. They do what we like to call the post-spawn funk of fish are spread out. There might be a couple bite windows where the fish that are stressed out from spawning and tending to their beds go on feed so they can sustain themselves, but they can get real goofy and they can do some crazy things. They might go out over deep water and just cruise, move into their summer habitats. They might just hunker down next to a dock or a log and just kind of hang out and just wait it out till they feel a little better. They do all kinds of crazy things on that post-spawn funk, and the jerkbait doesn't really seem like it gets their attention as much. But when you do find some fish, fishing, like you said, the Ned rig works great. And that time of year, we're usually in towards where we have some bug hatches. So I like throwing a 3.5, 4 inch wacky worm on a really light head. So it sinks real slow, just slowly falling through the water column and just leaving it in a zone where they can see that it's there. They're going to come eat it because it's easy meal for them. They don't want to chase bait fish around. They don't want to chase crayfish around in the rocks. They want something easy to eat.
Yeah. Dragging a football tube really slow can help too. Say, you guys ever noticed if the smallies are guard or fry guarders after the spawn?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's usually the male, I think.
Yeah,
too.
but it's mostly right on the nest. But what if the fry moves off it? If it's on the nest, they're doing it. But if the fry moves off, I guess don't have the best polarized glasses to see that if they're out in that 10 feet of water, but because largemouth, they'll be fry grinding for like 2-3 weeks after the spawn.
I can speak to this because with the advanced technology we have today, you can see the ball of the fry above the bed, and you can see the male guarding them. And I've accidentally driven too close to them before, and the ball will head out. And then I could watch them as I floated by. They go back in because that's where they know it's safe. And the male comes back to protect them.
So it's primarily next to the bed.
I believe they do stick around to their bed and they kind of know where it's at. That's just got to be something passed down over genetics over millions of years that they just know.
And there's people, when it talks to fishing beds or sight fishing them, which we get to that spawn time, there's people talk, it's great, and then people don't hurt you, then people say it's not a good idea. I'm kind of mixed on that, depending on the species of fish. I think the smallmouth tend to go back to that nest pretty quick, and there's not that many predators around there to raid the nest as quick. you get in the weeds with the largemouth, there's always a predator 6 inches away that's going to move in right away on that bed. What's you guys' opinion on it?
I think you're mostly correct on that. There may not be many predators around to raid these beds when people are handling the fish and catching the fish. I think the bigger issue at hand when it comes to bed fishing for smallmouth is how easily accessible they can be. And for one group to come through on a spot and pluck every female off of those beds and not on that flat, and another group can come back 5 minutes later and catch the same fish again, and then the first group comes back around and does it again because they had fun catching them the first time. Now the second guy gets a chance at the 4-pounders they caught. I don't like seeing that. I don't like seeing fish get stressed out time and time again, because we talk about this a lot with smallmouth on beds. They don't have hands. They can't pick up your lure and move it. They've got to use their mouth. So that fish is not eating your lure, it's moving it. You can, and a lot of times bed fishing for them, it's actually, it can be frustrating when you get on a fish that's real smart, because they'll pick your bait up and spit it before you even have a chance to set the hook. They know that you're fishing for them, that it's not real, and they'll pick it and spit it fast. And I see it too often where these fish are getting, caught. Somebody's, put them on the scale, weigh him. Let's see how long he is. Let's get pictures. Let's get videos. If you're gonna go catch some of these fish on their beds, give them 1 or 2 casts. If that fish isn't striking your lure right away, real aggressive, then it's probably been caught a couple times and it's pretty stressed out. So I would err towards leaving those fish alone so we can protect the future of our fisheries.
I think you need to be real careful about fishing them when they're spawning. Leave them alone if you possibly
And there's
can.
quite a few that I've noticed through pictures from where I used to work, and then even visually seen it myself. A lot of the mouths of these fish are getting tore up pretty bad. You just kind of like feel sorry for them.
I could tell you a really funny story on bed fishing. I mean, we were fishing. We weren't bed fishing that day, but I had a client, and I want to catch a 20-inch or better smallmouth. And finally, I'm going along, and I looked down, and I could see this fish in about 5 feet of water, and it was clearly over 20 inches. I said, well, throw that bait right over there, and he threw it in there, and I watched the fish pick it up and carry it out of the bed and drop it. I said, why didn't you set the hook? He said, never touched the bait. I said, throw it over there again. He threw it over there again, picked it up, carried it out. He never set the hook. And I said, man, that fish can't. No, it didn't. No, it didn't. I said, throw it in there again the third time. And the third time the fish picked it up. And as soon as it picked it up, reached over and I slapped his rod like this. And the rod hit him right between the eyes. And he was about ready to cuss me out. And all of a sudden he realized he's got a fish on the line. So, they are very aggressive when something lands in that bed. So like you said, you can multiple catch them and stress that fish out many times. I just probably, you're better off not to do it, I think.
Yeah. Like I said, typically if I do decide to do a little bit of bed fishing, it's pretty selective. I only do it maybe on 1 or 2 lakes. But like I said, I'll usually give them 1 or 2 casts at the bed. If that fish isn't hawking on that bait and taking it right away, I'm going to leave it alone, because I've seen it where you can really play with the fish. You can drive the boat right over top of them, trolling motor, stick the rod down towards them, all kinds of stuff. I've seen guys doing all kinds of weird things to these fish, and that fish stays right on the bed. They don't leave. And that fish is just too stressed out. And if you stress them out too much, I've also seen where they leave the bed and they don't come back. I've seen it. I've seen it where a fish will get so stressed out over being caught and stuff getting thrown at them, driving boats over top of them, playing with them, that they leave the bed, and I go back the next day to see if that fish is still there. It's not.
What's you guys' favorite combinations for different types of baits as far as rod and reel setups? I mean, how long a rod, what action you like, Ken?
Well, it depends upon the presentation. For a jerk bait, I don't go any longer than 6'4", because I like to jerk my rod straight down, and if I go longer, I'll end up hitting the rod tip on the water, and I like to be pretty aggressive at times, so I keep with a shorter rod tip. I just use a 7-1 gear ratio. If I'm throwing spinner baits, I'll go like a lower gear ratio, because otherwise if I use a higher one, I'm rolling the spinner bait too high in a water column. I like a 7-2 medium heavy action for spinner baits. Same thing with chatterbaits. Rattle traps, I used to use a glass composite by Ugly Stick, because it had a melobolic bend that went all the way to the foot of the rod almost. and I use it with 17-pound Invis-X fluorocarbon on a lot of my baits, on reaction baits, and then until I found Be More Efficient, they have technique-specific rods for $120 you can only buy online, and that chatterbait rod and rattle trap are just perfect. It's got everything.
Yeah, different rod actions. There is no such thing as the best rod for everything, I don't think, is there?
Yeah, it seems like there's some pretty good options when it comes to the open-faced spinning rod world of rods that can do it all, but they may not be the best at doing, every technique. I typically will gravitate towards like a 6'10" medium light for a lot of my more finesse techniques. Some of those lighter Ned heads, some of those hair jigs, small swim baits, stuff like that. And I really only ever step up to a medium action if I'm going to be fishing something a little bit more aggressive, like suspended jerkbait or a blade bait or a little bit bigger paddle tail, or something that I'm snapping the rod with, like the Berkeley Finisher is an excellent bait for catching walleyes and smallmouth. Berkeley's come out with a lot of good hard baits that are excellent. I like fishing them on a medium action rod, just a fast tip, so you can really snap that lure. But on those other techniques, like a jig and a minnow on an 1/8 ounce head, I like that medium light because it seems like I can cast it a lot better, and I got a lot more control over what my minnow's doing down there.
I know Ken mentioned reel ratios, and that's kind of everybody nowadays, it seems like they come out with all these 8-to-1 ratios, and some of them are even higher than that. Everybody wants to jump on that super fast ratio, and there are presentations where that's going to hurt you because you're moving the bait faster than you really should, I think.
Yeah, and Ken spoke to that on when he said with his spinner baits, if you've got too high a gear ratio reel, it can be difficult to wind slow enough with those high gear ratio reels to let your spinner bait get down to the right depths, or your crankbait will be going too fast, or you pick the line up too fast on your jerkbait and you move it. So when you've done your twitch and you go to wind up the slack, you don't want to be moving that lure after it's halfway through with your pause, and once you've wound your slack up, you wound too much up. Now you moved it. So a lot of times lower gear ratio reel can be really effective for more of those cast and wind presentations.
And let's talk a little bit about some largemouth stuff. That's one thing we've got up here also all across the north. I mean, there was a emphasis put on trying to get rid of every largemouth bass up here at one point, which was a big mistake, I think. I mean, I remember talking to one of the guys, and I said, well, do you think we should, throw back the big ones and maybe you're going to keep some of them 10-inch ones? And he said, why? He said, the big ones eat more. I mean, that was the more mentality we saw for a while, but hopefully that's kind of tapered down some. But the largemouth fishing up here would be pretty good too, Ken.
Yeah, Ken. The other thing is, I don't use a lot of leaders when I'm out largemouth fishing, but I lose a lot of money to the northerns. We have a lot of northerns up here, and there's a lot of YouTube videos and different ways to clean them. A lot of people can them, and when the water's cold, they taste good. I prefer that. I have served guests northerns and walleyes, and they couldn't tell me the difference.
Well, you mentioned losing baits to them, and the one thing is, a lot of people want to go toward a steel leader right away. And either if you're going to go with a steel leader, use a real fine wire steel leader on some of these smaller baits. But I found that, fluorocarbon, once you get up to about 15 pounds of fluorocarbon, yes, they can bite it off, but it generally doesn't happen that easy. I mean, you usually don't lose near as many baits with that fluorocarbon, 15 or 20 pound fluorocarbon in front of it. Little short piece.
Well, it helps if you're running your whole spool on fluorocarbon, but nowadays, with the expensive line that fluorocarbon is, a lot of people are going with just a 6 to 10 foot fluorocarbon leader with braid, and they're using the same rod that they did with full fluorocarbon. So if you're a braid angler, instead of going medium heavy, go medium and just fish the same style.
Yeah. There's all that. Like you said, there's a lot of, fishing up north is a different challenge too, because you are fishing where you got fish with teeth that cut through the line real quick, and you can lose a lot of baits, but there are a few tricks that you can get away with to eliminate that too.
Yeah, and touching back to, like you said, kind of a minor witch hunt on the largemouth we have here in the North Woods. A lot of people complain about them because they claim that they are eating the walleyes or removing the food source from the walleyes. Well, that's been proven wrong in quite a few studies. I would argue that reducing the largemouth population has actually increased our northern population here, as they are probably pretty common enemies in some of the weed beds that they like to reside in.
Yeah, well, the northern pike are a predator, and they're hard on muskie populations. They're hard on every kind of population if you get too many of them. And we've actually seen up north here on some lakes, they're trying to increase the bag limit. I mean, there are lakes up here in the Hayward area that are 10 pike a day, which, you can get some pretty good table fare out of 10 pike in that 25-inch range. But, they could be detrimental to a lake, and they're very prolific fish when it comes to spawning and reproduction.
And it's no feat around here on some of these lakes to go catch 10 pike in a day. It's easy. A lot of these lakes, it's pretty easy. You're seeing lots of pike in that, 18 to 25-inch range. If you do catch those fish over 25, pushing 30, maybe we get a couple a year over 30 inches on some of these lakes. Those bigger, more trophy class fish, let them go. But the surplus of fish in that 20-inch range, I mean, you can get you'd be surprised at the bags of meat I dish out to clients at the end of the day after keeping a bunch of pike, and they had a great time catching them. And then I tell them, cook them this way, give them the instructions. They text me the next day, said we cooked it up. It was better than walleyes. We don't even want to go for walleyes next year. Just bring us catch more pike.
Yeah, you catch a lot more if you're a meat fisherman. You can be a lot more successful and catch a lot more fish. Talking about largemouth up here, we got, like I mentioned, we have so many different type of waters up here, and we've got some smaller waters that are remote. You can get into with a small boat or a kayak or something, and you're basically jungle fishing. There's a lot of weeds in those and lily pads and stuff, and that's a whole nother option when it comes to fishing, but it can be kind of fun fishing that kind of fishing. It can.
Yeah, Spro Frog and Wacky Rigs are two of the top ones. But one of the things that it's a long forgotten technique. Get on them flats and throw a rattle trap. I don't see a lot of anglers doing it around here, but I've had 100 fish days. That's counting northerns too, As long as it's red, orange, or red chartreuse, that's the only colors you need to buy in the spring.
Rattle trap's an incredible bait. I mean, they just catch fish. I mean, it's a really good largemouth. And it's actually a good bait fairly early in the year for bass, too.
Yeah, in that colder water, that tight wobble that those rattle traps put out, that raise and fall, ripping it up out of the weed beds, they're going to come out chasing for it because these fish are territorial and they're angry in that 55-degree water temps. They'll come slam that bait so hard, you pull your rod out of your hand.
Yeah.
Well, on certain parts of the Lake of the Woods, and then Lake Winnipeg is probably what was first really noted because it has a little tannic color. They're ripping rattle baits through the ice and catching big walleyes on them.
You talk about rattle baits too. There's some out there that run really close to the surface and almost top water, but they're subsurface. And they got very loud noises in them, and you got wake baits. There's a whole bunch of stuff for fishing close to that surface or in that shallow water.
Talking about jerk baits, a lot of them have a weighted weight forward and balanced weight with tungstens inside them. Some have multiples, and then they have silence. Every one of mine have some sort of BBs in them, and there's some days I'm watching them follow, and they won't commit. I should probably have some silent ones in my boat too.
Yeah, you could actually adjust or dial in those jerk baits too to suspend because
suspend strips.
If you have one that slowly sinks, you can change the hooks out to lighter hooks and make it either neutral buoyant or race. And if you want one that you want to make it a little heavier, I know Storm makes them suspend dots and strips. They're like stick-on lead that you can buy, and that's an incredible trick to actually fine-tune that bait a little bit.
It's something everybody should start picking up and tweaking their lures with. Prime example is fished a Tournament of Champions event on Lake Vermilion a couple years back in Minnesota, and I was catching some fish, but I was as I was fishing, and my crankbaits just didn't seem like they were pounding the rocks as much. I made a little adjustment with some of those suspend strips, get that extra half a foot, so my crankbait would really be digging in those rocks. Boy, that made a big difference when it came to catching those smallmouth. I was really getting on them pretty good fishing a crankbait in the rocks. And without those suspend strips, I probably didn't have the right crankbait with the right bill. So you can make some adjustments on that stuff. And on jerkbaits too a lot. Sometimes even the $25 jerkbaits that they sell now, they're not all perfect. You might get one. You might want to water test it, in your tub or something, and see how does this one react. Is it sinking a little bit, or is it floating a little bit, or is it floating a lot? Some of them have a very, very slow sink rate, and so maybe you don't want to touch them. Some of them rise up a little bit, so maybe a little bit of that suspense strip. Maybe they're floating a little bit towards the nose, but you want your jerkbait to be nose down. So you add some up on the front so that when he's sitting in the water, he's sitting with his tail up, so them fish will come up and see him as a weakened fish, and he's going to get ate.
I think a lot of the tournament guys that fish a lot of tournaments, they go out and they dial them baits in pretty good. They don't just grab an off-the-shelf bait a lot of times.
Well, the difference between the weekend angler and the pros do a lot of customization to the bait. And it may not help catch the fish, but it builds their confidence.
Yeah.
So they're really dialed in on what they want to do with that bait once it gets the water. And that's what, and then you combine that with analyzing all the electronics and spend a lot of time self-training. That's what separates those from us, the weekend guys. And you look at the younger generation with technology, they understand that better than I do, or I ever will. And they've been tinkering with baits since they were 5 years old. So you take that learning curve, that's what's making all this younger generation kicking the older generation's butt out there on tour.
And if you're fishing for bass and you're fishing with one rod out there, you need to ask yourself, why do these pros have several rods rigged laying in the boat? Because in my opinion, if I'm going after bass, and especially largemouth, and I'm up in the weeds and I'm fishing shallow, I'm going to have two different totally presentations rigged. Because if you say you're throwing a frog and you get fish blow up on it and you miss that fish, you throw a Texas rig worm or a jig or something right back in that spot, chances are you're going to catch that fish.
We like to call that the 1-2 punch.
Yeah.
If you're fishing something that you're getting some action on, and you've got another rod ready, you've seen it on Bassmaster Live, on MLF, all them live fishing where you get to watch the tournaments. Guy will be like, oh, big one, oh, he missed it, and then he'll grab something else. Instead of throwing a lure the fish just striked at, he grabs something else to throw in there, throws it in there, boom, smokes it right away. So, that's something that us anglers have learned, that it's not always the best idea to throw the same lure back at that fish. A different presentation might get him to strike a little harder.
Same life thing if you're fishing pike or muskies or any predatory fish. If you miss a fish and he comes in and he grabs it and you don't get a hook in him, you throw something else back at him. Don't throw the same bait back at him, I don't think, most of the time.
I look at some of the muskie anglers, the hardcore guys around here, and they've got those boxes lined with the same size bulldog in 29 different colors. And I look at them and I go, why do you need every single? Well, that's why, because, maybe that one's got an orange tip on the tail. And then you throw that one back in there because he's got that orange tip on the tail, and it was the same one he just striked at, but just a little bit different. He's coming back. He's hitting that one harder now.
Yeah.
So stuff like that, they might look at me and go, why do you need all these different jig heads and all these different minnows and all these different worms? They're all a little different. They all do things, a little bit better than the next one. And maybe we're catching the fisherman, not the fish. But if, like Ken said, if it gives you the confidence, if it makes you feel like that you're going to catch those fish, a lot of times that's the deciding factor. Being confident in yourself, being confident in your lures, being confident in your equipment, that can make a big difference in an angler.
You talk about multiple lures. We're sitting here in the shop, and look behind me here. There's hundreds and hundreds of musky lures hanging on the wall.
Not to mention,
I almost can't move my arms around in here. I might get hooked.
Not to mention the length of rods. Talking about length of rods, when I first started throwing the little marabou jigs that, total game changer at certain times of the year, there's like a 2-week window that's, if you ain't throwing it, you're not going to cash on a tournament. So I had a Billy Westmoreland boron rod. I started throwing on that, and it's like a 6.2. And I was like, God dang, I can't get a long enough cast. You go to a 7.6, medium light, you're an extra 50, 60 feet with it. Yeah. And with the lower gear ratio especially.
It takes a little bit of practice with those longer rods and those light jigs, but I've seen them 8.5 foot rods. Guys, we fished Guamigan Bay, Lake Superior, well known for the hair jig bite out there. I've seen guys in the bay fishing there fishing, like you said, with that 6 foot, that 6'6", that 6'10", and they're catching some fish. But you look over and you see a guy that's got a long rod. You watch how he casts. It takes him a while to set up right. Otherwise, he'll be sending that lure, but he'll be casting way further than them other guys. And in that clear water where them fish get pressured high, talk about Sturgeon Bay, Green Bay too. Those further casts make a big difference.
There's some lines out there now. Some of the new braided lines are just stellar when it comes to being able to cast. They're smaller diameter and they just cast really good. I know Suffolk has some really good lines for that. I know I've got spooled up with that Revolve and some of those lines. And you can really shoot that little jig out a long ways on that rod, on that line.
Most of the brands have come out with their version of what they would call a forward-facing sonar or the ultimate spinning rod, braided line. That's just typically an 8-strand braided line, so it's going to be more smooth. And then a lot of them now have little coating on them to make them extra smooth. Coming through the line guides, all the friction coming through the line guides is important. And if you got a high-quality rod with high-quality inserts, you'll notice a difference in casting distance. And it's something that a lot of people jump in my boat, and I'll tell them, the weed line is 60 feet away. We're casting here. Don't cast further than 70 because then you'll be in the thick weeds up on top, and that's not where the fish are at. And my stuff is set up pretty well, and they'll be casting way further than that, and they've never experienced that before. Having nice equipment that is set up right. And I tell them, you got to lean off the casting distance a little bit. You're getting too far in the weeds. But one brand that I found I really have liked and stuck with has been the Finn's braided line. They make a couple. They make a couple different versions of line. They got some 4-strand, 5-strand, the 8-strand lines, and they've got some newer, more experimental lines out there that you don't see a lot of brands coming out with. And I've had great luck with them.
One thing too, I'm going to inject there is you talk about casting distance and stuff and with the rods and casting, but casting accuracy, especially for largemouth when you're fishing structure and cover along shore, can be absolutely critical. I don't know how many times I could tell you I've been casting. Guys, there's a bass in that tree over there, and the cast is 10 feet this way, 10 feet that way, or in the tree. And I make one fire cast in there and I catch the bass right away. It's like casting accuracy is real important because a lot of times it comes down to that strike window. I said, you got to get it in close to the bass for them to come after it.
When on highly pressured or if you're fishing really shallow, I refer it to as feather dusting the water. So it takes a while, but if you can just barely just ripple the water with your bait presentation and I might throw a 1/2-ounce jig and do that, and then the person behind me can't do that with a jig, but he could do it a lot better using a spinning rod and skipping a wacky rig. Because if you don't want to disrupt the fish, you just want to make a little bit of presentation so that fish will turn around and pick up your bait. So,
especially on a flat, calm day, your jig hitting the water on a cast, boom, splash. These fish are very aware, and they can feel with their lateral lines. They know something just hit the water there. And sometimes that's a good thing. They're going to come check it out because they're in the mood. And sometimes that's a bad thing. That could be a warning sign to them. Hey, we got trouble.
The same thing with dock fishing. If you're not an experienced angler, don't be skipping or trying to skip jigs on docks. I mean, you don't even need a weight. Just put on a Senko and rig it Texas style. And that way you don't disrupt anyone's docks. Because I know there's a lot of shore owners here that they'll throw rocks at you if you come fish around their dock.
We've all seen the videos and the stories of those, you stay away from my dock, or I had someone hit my pontoon. Well, I'm not the guy that hit your pontoon. I'm sorry that someone hit your pontoon, but sometimes, if you're going to be, a close quarters angler where you're fishing around a lot of docks and a lot of people's shoreline stuff, maybe find a lake that's got a lot of natural laydowns and trees in the water to go practice on before you start throwing around some of the boats they have on these lakes now. Boy, they're getting pretty crazy. Pretty nice stuff. I would feel really bad if I hit something with one of my lures. You have to respect their property.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about a couple other little things as we wrap up this podcast here. And everything is high tech now. We got there's new electronics out there. I know Humminbird came out with, they changed over to that Explorer series, and you got a whole lot of electronics in your boat. There's more demand for battery power than we've ever seen before in a boat. And I know all three of us have switched to lithium batteries, and especially we went to the amped outdoors batteries. And what's you guys' opinion of how you've been doing? I know I could talk to you about afterwards here, but how you get as far as compared to using the lead acid batteries you used in the past?
My experience with the lithium batteries, and I ordered them from Amped Outdoors, and I installed them, and I don't even have the newest ones with the Bluetooth and the heaters. I've been running them for 4 years now, and it has been no issues whatsoever. 0 issues. I plug them in, they charge fast. I've never run out of power. If I needed to take them out for the season, if the boat's going to be out in the cold, to bring the batteries inside. They're lightweight. They're not hard for me to pull out of the bottom of that boat. Your lead acid battery, your AGM battery, you're talking 80 pounds. These batteries, we're talking, what, 15, 20,
yep.
20 pounds?
24 pounds.
24 pounds. Yeah. They're easy. So a lot of guys that are up there in the age and they don't have the physical capabilities to pull them giant batteries in and out if they're having problems, they need to work on stuff. There's a lot of advantages to the lithium batteries, and the longevity has been something that's really impressed me. As someone who fishes as much as I do every day, multiple times a day, long 12, 14-hour days on the water, I would go through probably lead acid batteries once or twice a year just because they just can't handle that abuse. You'd be swapping them out to get new ones that are lasting longer. Those lead batteries are just cheaply made. They just don't last as long. And maybe one season for the average guy. We've all seen that, where you go to start your boat up and nothing wants to work because that battery's bad. But these lithiums have been 0 issues.
If you're going to pull 3 batteries out of the back of your boat and just put in one, the performance of getting out of the hole, the performance of the boat is unbelievable, because it's way better than taking one guy out of the boat, because all the weight's right down there, right in the back by your transom. And I've noticed it a lot on my boat. And then I've only running a 36 volt 60 amp hour, and pre-fishing with my Garmin, I go dark to dark, and I go to charge it up. 2 hours later, it's charged up, and I'm shaking my head. I go, shit.
It was never like that 20 years ago.
No. I'm running both of my boats. I'm running 24 volt amp hours. Give me 100 amp hours, and I do a lot in the summertime with families, crappie and bluegill, and just going out having fun, family fishing, guiding. I can sit out there in 15, 20, 25 mile an hour winds for hours and hours and hours, and I come home and I plug the charger in, and I look at the app, and I get 60-some% left in the batteries in the boat. The thing that eats the battery up the quickest is all the electronics. So believe it or not, more than the trolling motor. You can run that battery down as much or more, but I still never down. And the interesting thing with the lithium batteries, with the lead acid batteries, as you get down to half a charge in the battery, you're not at 12 volts. You're down at 11 volts or even lower than that sometimes. And that equipment may not be working at its maximum. Whereas with the lithiums, you're still at that 12.5 to 13 volts the whole time with a discharge on it.
The new screens we have, the bigger the screen, the higher the quality the pixels are on the screen. The forward-facing transducers we have, all the extra transducers we have, they've got to put stronger, faster processors in these screens to understand and compute the data and actually give you your image on your screen. So and those require more power. It's not the 5-inch, Lowrance that had, down imaging in 2D anymore. We're talking about some complex units that require a lot of power, and the lithiums are the only way to go.
You bet. Well, we're about out of time here, guys. It's been interesting talking. We'll be talking about maybe summer bass fishing next trip around. Maybe I can get one of the bass tournament pros to chime in and get an interview with them or something. But a lot of interesting stuff coming up. We're past the winter. Get rid of the winter blues, I guess, so we could get back out. I don't ice fish much anymore. It's just my biggest complaint on ice fishing is it was always too hard to cut a big enough hole to get my boat in. But anyway, I want to thank you guys for coming in. I know you want to give out some guide information if they're interested in it.
Yeah, you can find me on Facebook, Noah Glitto Guide Service. You can find my website. If you search up, guides in the Hayward area, or you search my name up, I pop up. Noah Glitto Guide Service. You can call or text me at 612-616-6287. Get a hold of me. Book a trip. We can help you find a place to stay. We can make recommendations on where to go to eat, where to rent stuff if you want to go riding or go, good hikes or place to bring a canoe. We've got all that stuff. We know all the good places to go. And the visitor center knows all that stuff as well too. So you get a hold of them, they'll point you in the right direction.
Or if you want to talk fishing, I now work at L&M Supply in Hayward. And I'm usually floating the whole store. Just ask for Ken, and I can assist you in any tips on any lakes in the area or some equipment if you need.
How long have you been fishing bass tournaments, Ken?
Since '89.
A long time. So we've got a veteran bass tournament guy here as a co-host. So anyway, need more information, you can go to our radio website, which is wnoradio.com. And that's a subpage of the main website. The links on Noah and a lot of the other guides are listed on there too, and a lot of fishing information. Anyway, I want to thank you guys for coming in. Thanks, Noah.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, John.
And we'll be back again with another interesting podcast for you sometime here as soon as we can get another one together. If you'd like more information on the Hayward, Wisconsin area, check out the Wisconsin Northland Outdoors Radio Show on our other podcast channel, wnoradio.podbean.com. Or for even more information, on the web at haywardlakes.com or haywardareachamber.com. Thanks for listening, and watch for our next Northland Bassin podcast. And if you enjoyed the podcast, please like and subscribe to the channel.